Let me be very clear. I believe there is a God. I believe there's a God who is active in the creation process. Now, how did he do it, and when did he do it, and how long did he take? I don't honestly know. And I don't think knowing that would make me a better or a worse president. But I'll tell you what I can tell this country. If they want a president who doesn't believe in God, there's probably plenty of choices. But if I'm selected as president of this country, they'll have one who believes in those words that God did create.
That was Republican presidential contender Mike Huckabee at last week's third GOP debate, explaining his position on the evolution of man. Now, Governor Huckabee, he joins us right now. And, Governor, it's always good to see you, my friend. You know, one of the things you first of all, you have had the best one-liners. The one about John Edwards happens to be my favorite. Do you go in planning a few of these jokes when you're going into those debates?
Well, you know, I always try to just be loose and ready, and, you know, you never know what's going to come at you, so you hope you can just be yourself and be natural, and that's what I sought to do, just be honest with people.
You've expressed some frustration, though, in the debate process, because I think the last debate you weren't asked a question to, what, 15 minutes in?
Yeah, I got the first question at 15. I didn't get another one until 21 minutes later. But I realize with 10 candidates on the stage, it's tough to get to everybody. But the two things that I really would like to see in these debates, number one is a better distribution of the time among all the candidates. But the second thing is, let's talk about the questions that people sit around their dinner table and talk about. Sean, I think I mentioned to you when we talked on the radio that we had 3 debates, not one question about education. Do you not think that Americans care that every 60 seconds 2 kids drop out of school and millions of kids will spend their entire school day with their heads on their desks sound asleep? Not because they're dumb, but because they're bored to death.
Yeah.
And those are the things we need to be talking about.
Governor, I've watched your record. We've known each other for a long time. You have not been able to break into the top tier candidates yet. Why do you think that is?
Money. I mean, it's real simple. You know, the people who have a lot more money tend to be looked at as the ones who have a message to go with it. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I still think, though, that this race is far from over. You know, we've got to raise more money. That's the biggest challenge we have. And, you know, we're looking at creative ways to do it. You know, if I have to sell a kidney, I mean, I think we were coming to that maybe at some point. But
I don't know. We're not going there. Because in many ways, like, for example, on the issue of Iraq, I'm watching the Republican candidates. They seem to agree. The biggest differences in my mind are with the Democrats that want to raise taxes, nationalize health care, guarantee a defeat on Iraq, and don't seem to understand the nature of the consequential times we live in terms of terrorism.
They don't understand that terrorism is not going to go away if we walk away from it. And we have one person on our stage that tends to think that it's all our fault, too. Here's the reality. These are people who have a theological basis on which to destroy us. This is not a conventional war. At its heart, it's theological. They believe that, as the Blues Brothers would say, they're on a mission from God. And they think that it is their sole purpose on this earth to destroy every last living one of us. They don't care if it takes 1,000 days or if it takes 1,000 years. Democrats want this whole process to be over in 1,000 days. I do too. But, Sean, that's not going to happen.
Governor, I'm not sure that's an accurate representation of Democrats, but I want to ask you about something you said at the Southern Baptist Convention in 1998 when you said we need to take this nation back for Christ. Tim Russert asked you about it. You said you'd phrase it differently today. Isn't that a theological view? Isn't that putting America in a theological frame? And how would you put it today if that's not what you meant?
Well, here's what I mean. If this nation were taken back to Christ, if we lived by his principles, not one kid in this country would go to bed hungry tonight. Not one kid would sleep under a bridge or in the back of a car. No wife would have the daylight swacked out of her by some abusive husband. If this nation were back to Christ, we wouldn't have theft, we wouldn't have drug addiction. This would be a pretty decent place to live. And that's what I mean when I say, let's go back to Christ. His basic premise is you treat other people like you want to be treated.
I agree with that premise, by the way, but when you phrase it that way and talk about the nation going back to Christ, you're saying we've left Christ, and you're also framing the debate theologically and sounds exclusionary to people who may not perhaps believe what you believe.
Well, Alan, there's a big difference in saying I want to go back to Christ so we can love each other rather than that the theological war of the Islamic fascists is to kill us. I don't want to kill anybody. I want people to live. I want them to live whether they're in the mother's womb. I want them to live whether they're 80 years old and in the nursing home. I don't want someone coming in and giving them an injection and taking their lives from them when they're not ready and God's not ready for them to die. There's a big difference in the theology of love and the theology of hate. And so, yes, I'd make a clear contrast there.
You also have said, we played a little clip talking about evolution. You don't believe in evolution. Would you prevent it from being taught in schools?
No, I think it ought to be taught. I think people ought to hear all the viewpoints. But if real education gives exposure of students to a variety of views. But here's what I find interesting. Why on earth would that question be posed in a presidential debate anyway? I'm not sure what on earth it has to do with being president. Now, here's what I think the real question.
Neither does a haircut either, really. But
well, but that does have something to do in terms of judgment, and I thought that was a point to make, that if you're going to talk about overspending and irresponsible Congress. But here's what I would say about the evolution question. The real issue is, do we believe there is a God who is active in this world, or we believe that this wonderful design is the process and product of sheer chance?
All right, Governor, we thank you very much for coming on the show. Nice to see you once again. We check with Greta Van Sussner.